Welcome to Legal Meets, a look at legal beyond the law, a podcast by LegalMeets. On this episode of Legal Meets, we meet Kenneth Grady, a recognized thought leader in the legal industry and a pioneer in the application of lean thinking to the practice of law. This is part one of our two-part interview. Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Legal Meets. I'm Stevie Giassi, your host, and I'm joined by none other than Kenneth Grady. Welcome, Ken.
How you doing, Stevie?
I'm very well. It looks like you're deep down in the dungeon, in the bowels of the university, being a professor.
I am. I'm trapped in my little office here, enjoying a beautiful winter in Michigan.
It's great to have you on. Thanks for joining us. And you spend a lot of your time again with law students and wearing many different hats in the legal industry. But I just wanted to take you back a step, and if TED Talks got in touch with you today, and you weren't allowed to utter anything related to legal technology or talk about law, what would you talk about? And is there any hidden passions or a past life that you want to share with everyone?
Yeah. So if I had that fortunate event and they contacted me, I would like to talk about music and how music takes the bad things out of the air and creates an atmosphere where people can actually talk. They feel more relaxed and more comfortable. I was a rock and roll drummer and a jazz drummer in my former life, and so I had a lot of fun with music, and I got to know a lot of people through music, and I think it has just that ability to let your guard down and really get to know other people. It'd be a great thing to talk about. I'm sure everyone has already talked about it, but if they ask me, I'll come do it.
Wow, that's quite impressive. I had no idea that you were hiding a rock and roll background, and I guess a lean law evangelist, like a rock and roll drummer on the
yeah. It seemed a little long to retired rock and roll drummer, lean law evangelist, former general counsel. It was hard to fit on a business card, so we chopped it down.
Nice. And so I guess with the music side of things, and you'd be one of those people that has like a soundtrack to your life. Is that kind of is there a constant theme with the music and events in your life?
You would think so, but I guess like everything over time, you sort of evolve to doing everything. I like music. I enjoy listening to music. I'm sort of a child of my era, so I'm stuck with 60s music as being the sound that I like the most. A little bit after, a little before, and we've moved on in the world. But I think it's one of those things. If I hadn't been a musician, I'd been a chef, I'd talk about food. But it's one of those things that I think it's really, you go out with a group of people, you're listening to music, everybody's happy, everybody's having a good time. You can talk about things that are sensitive topics and people feel much more comfortable in doing it. I think my guess is that's probably why you see at all these state dinners and all these other events, they have music as part of the process because it does sort of help everybody get in a good mood.
Well, it is one of those truly, I guess, universal things. It transcends, even beyond language. It's one of those really innate human kind of instincts. So it's quite universal. So again, the science behind that will be quite interesting for a TED Talk, I think.
Yeah, you can go anywhere in the world, and they start playing music, and people get it. People understand it. They have no idea what maybe the story of the music, but they understand the music. And the music is interesting and fun. You see people nodding their head or clapping or tapping their foot. They just emotional. It's one of those things that appeals to humans, I guess, and it's a universal thing that appeals to humans. And there aren't that many things that we can say, regardless of where you're from or what language you speak or anything else. You viscerally get music, and so it's. Yeah, there's got to be something there. I'm sure.
Yeah, awesome.
They're figuring out as we speak the gene that turns on and turns off appreciation of music. So.
Wow. Okay. Well, great stuff. So it sounds like you already got some footnotes for your talk. So.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like at some stage in your early career, you had to decide whether you wanted to go for the rock and roll parties or the law school frat parties. How did you end up actually deciding to become a lawyer? What took you down that path?
Yeah, well, I did start off down the music path, and probably made the right choice because of a number of reasons we don't need to explore. But
Yeah.
um, I got into law, I think, the way many lawyers, at least in the U.S., get into law, which is not so much that was the start. I intended since I was 3 years old to be a lawyer, but I had the opportunity before I went to law school to work in a law firm. I spent about a little over a year doing that. I got to see what lawyers did, understand the environment. And the thing that I liked about it were the complex problems and the solving of complex problems, which attracts a lot of people to law who aren't interested in science problems and solving in that area. So that's what got me started in law. And once I got into it, a lot of other aspects cropped up and things that were enjoyable to do. But the first trick was there were some really interesting sounding complex problems that involved people. And I liked people and I liked complex problems.
Yeah, that's a perfect, I guess, crossroads of wanting to help people. I guess like most lawyers that I talk to, you really trace back. Sometimes they even forget themselves, but essentially just comes back to that initial thing that drew them to law was just wanting to help people. And so it's a very, I guess, natural kind of place to gravitate towards. If you again said you don't want to go towards the sciences, but you actually want to solve problems and help people, so that's great to hear.
Yeah, it's a fun thing to get into. I had started with a science background and had some of that, but if you think about another one of these universal constants around the whole world, everybody has got to have some sort of laws, customs, rules, things to live by in order for their society to work. So it's another one of those things that everybody needs in
Mm.
order for their world to operate from day to day. And if you're not curing cancer, or if you're not sending spaceships off to Mars, in the non-sciences area, it's one of those things that,
It still
again,
touches everyone's life, right?
yeah,
So
touches everybody.
oh, that's awesome. It must be one of the reasons why I think you've tried to retire multiple times and you keep going going back. I don't know if your golf game is really scratchy or what's going on, or the wife wants to kick you out of the house to kind of watch Netflix. But you've unsuccessfully retired a couple times, and you've, as you just mentioned, you've worn just about every hat in the legal world, and you're kind of doing a few things right now. Just take us through that journey a little bit, and kind of what's occupying your time right now.
So yes, I did try to retire. I've been a total failure at retirement. Uh, I retired from being a general counsel. I'd been in-house for 20 years. I had been in private practice for almost as long. And when I retired, it wasn't, in my mind at least, to retire. It was to move on. They say baby boomers don't retire. We just move to the next career. And that's sort of what I was doing. I had in mind trying to do a couple of things. One was a grandiose notion of trying to get the profession to operate better than it has historically, certainly in more recent years, because I think there's a challenge that if lawyers don't operate more efficiently, better quality, more affordably, et cetera, people are becoming increasingly bothered by that, and that's not good for the profession. The second thing, I think, as I mentioned, laws are important to society. I think the legal system is important to it working properly. So I wanted to help contribute to making that work better and continue to function. As you can tell, I like to talk, so I wanted a captive audience, and getting in front of law students gives you a guaranteed opportunity to talk, whether you're sharing wisdom or just sharing talking time. So
Yep.
it's fun to do that. I like being around students. They haven't been burdened yet by practicing law, so they have creative ideas.
They're not jaded just
They're
yet.
not jaded yet. They're interested. They're enthusiastic. They're looking forward to their careers. They really want to help people, and they haven't, reached a point where they're struggling with other demands on their time. So that's kind of fun. I like writing. And I've never really felt like I had the chance to spend time writing and sharing thoughts. So those were the things I wanted to do in this so-called retirement.
Okay, I hope it's going well for you. It seems like you're filling up the hours in the day very nicely. But you've kind of, I guess, earned the title, and you're a lean law evangelist. And I think that's what you're best known as these days from your, again, writing and talking at conferences. Definitely one of the better job titles going around, I think, for attending parties, apart from the rock and roll drummer part. But for those playing, at home, essentially at its core, what is, because they'll hear it a lot, and what is lean thinking? I mean, the whole lean methodology, it's becoming more and more pronounced, I guess, through the startup world, through all kinds of businesses, but it's been around for a while. What's the general concept? Because again, it's quite ambiguous, I guess, for a lot of people.
Yeah, it is. It's not. It's not as clearly defined out there in the universe. So, 1 minute on where it came from. It has many different strands, and in the 1940s through the early 1970s, Toyota pulled together a lot of different things that were going on in the manufacturing world in the U.S. and in other countries and in Japan, and the basic idea was for Toyota that they were getting into manufacturing cars. They were on an island nation. It didn't have a lot of resources on the nation. This was after the war. They didn't have an excess of people, an excess of money. So basically, to start making cars, they had to be very efficient. And that meant you couldn't waste anything. You couldn't waste steel, you couldn't waste rubber, you couldn't waste people, you couldn't waste time, you couldn't waste money. And so the philosophy was find a way to be efficient in what you do. And then the second part of the philosophy, which gets lost in today's talk a lot, was something called respect for humanity. Because the idea was people are valuable as well, and their time is valuable. And if we disrespect people by wasting their time, by having them do things that are not value-adding, then we're disrespecting them. And that shouldn't be part of our philosophy of how to, in Toyota's case, how to run our business. We should respect our employees. And so all of this came together. And then when it was ported over to the United States and the people who were talking about it wanted to go to car companies and others in the United States and talk about it, they thought, gee, if we go in and say to General Motors or Ford, we'd like you to use the Toyota production system, there probably was going to be a problem. And so a graduate student at MIT came up with the idea of using the word lean and lean thinking. Side note, he is now in charge of Google's autonomous car program, a guy named
Okay.
John
Great.
Krafchick. So it worked for him.
Okay. Yep.
But lean thinking is this philosophy, and there are a lot of tools that we've developed within the philosophy. The philosophy is be efficient, don't be wasteful, and respect humanity in what you do. There are many tools people will hear about: process mapping, process improvement. In the IT world, we hear about the Agile Manifesto and Agile development of software. In the startup world, you can hear about the lean startup. In the design world, we hear about design thinking. All of these ideas use various parts of the toolkit that's lean in different ways to systematically make what you do better by getting rid of waste, by being more efficient, having better quality, etc. So that's basically what it is. And as I say, there are many tools out there, and many people hear about the tools, but they never hear sort of, why am I using the tool?
Yeah, the essential core philosophy of
Right.
what it's all about. And as you just described, you can actually apply it to pretty much anything. So some people just hear it again in relation to startups and some of the more prominent books. But from what you just described, it seems like you can actually really apply that philosophy to any industry, any vocation, actually any part of your life in some sense.
It has. It's been used now. There's hard to find an industry where it's not being used. And this is always sad to admit, but the people who get very into lean thinking will admit that they covertly use it in their lives. There was an interview on one of the radio stations, I remember, and they were interviewing a lean thinking consultant. And the interviewer said, does this affect your life in any way? And he sort of sheepishly said, well, when I travel, I get up or before I go to bed, I go into the bathroom and I arrange in place and in order the things I'll need to use in the morning so that I can very efficiently shave and brush my teeth and do whatever. That gives me more time to have my cup of coffee and read the newspaper before the day gets going. So he said, yeah, it's in every aspect of my life. I want to be efficient. I don't want to waste time.
It sounds a bit like Patrick Bateman from American Psycho, but I guess
yeah, that's why I say you don't want to advertise this. If you do it, you want to
yeah.
really sort of keep it in the tribe.
Yeah.
But you do see things, and you try and make your
Well,
life.
people are just busier, right? So
Yeah.
I think everyone's living a fast-paced life, and you can't kind of get that time back. So it's how do you effectively use that time? So
Yeah.
so that makes sense. So it's like I guess the legal industry as a whole, from the outside world, they might look at the industry as a late adopter of technology, but consider some, I guess, lawyers in general as Luddites when it comes to that kind of thing. But you kind of break that mold. You've been trained in lean methodology from, I think, maybe over 20 years ago in Japan. So how did you actually end up there, and what was that experience like when you first encountered it? Was it something very foreign, like you just the same way people are hearing about it now? Was it like that 20 years ago?
Well, 20 years ago was actually very foreign to here because it really wasn't in the U.S. very much. So it was something that had started coming into the U.S., but you would not hear it discussed any way that you do today. I had gone to work at a company as a lawyer, in-house lawyer at a company, and they gave me the opportunity, promotion to run one of their largest manufacturing facilities and a distribution facility. So I'm a lawyer. I have an MBA. I moved out of the law role into this business role. The company was doing lean thinking throughout the company. Had been doing that for about 2.5 years. And so within a month of arriving at the plant that I was going to run, I was shipped from Georgia to Japan, where I went through this training. The thing that was interesting for me, I went there not having been a manufacturing executive or brought up in the manufacturing world. So I didn't really have a lot of preconceived notions about how should we manufacture things. So when I went there and they started talking about here's how to do things and how to do them differently and in this non-wasteful method from a manufacturing side, to me it just made sense. I mean, it sounded very logical. It sounded
you weren't tied to any old
no.
pre kind of conceived ideas or ingrained habits. So
yeah, I mean, I just okay, this makes sense. I'm happy to do that. From a personal sort of a visceral reaction to it, I just had a personality that gravitated towards this don't be wasteful, be respectful type of background. So it didn't hit me strangely, but I was in a room filled with manufacturing executives who were all struggling mightily with this because it was really strange to them. It's very in some ways, it's very counterintuitive to things like manufacturing or other things that people do. So if you've learned the other way, it can be tough to break the habit.
the funny thing is, like when you talk about lean, it can almost seem too obvious. Like, yeah, just do everything as efficiently as you would, because that's what you would just do. But as you described, when it comes to the practical world and business, there's so many ingrained habits and so many things that you pick up from generations past that you end up creating this big shift. And as you described, you were probably there going, "Yeah, this is all right, this is doable," but everyone else in the room was just shaking their heads and going, and the idea is to make more money and be more efficient and live a better life, but it seems impossible.
And it's also when you talk to people, most people who have been doing something for a while will say, "I'm efficient. I've been doing this for a while, so I am efficient." And one of the challenges is looking at efficiency through the lens of what you're being taught and then trying to convey to somebody how what they think of as efficient either isn't efficient, it may be extremely inefficient, or still incorporates a lot of wasteful things. And that, it's the difference between watching somebody play the piano and playing the piano. You have to learn how to do things, and it's a challenge to pick that up. So like any habit, it's a habit you can learn. It takes a while to learn it, but once you do it, you don't want to go back. Those of us who learned WordPerfect were very comfortable with it. Then we had to switch to Word. Once you get really comfortable with Word, it's hard to go back to WordPerfect because it's your new habit.
And that's the thing. I think the amount of technology and the speed that technology is advancing means that you almost have to be in this constant. If you don't adopt lean or be in that constant state of kind of a beta, that you're really going to struggle, because in the past, in the example you're giving, something manual, like you're using a shovel for something and a tractor comes along or whatever else, it might have taken a long time, maybe 20, 30 years for something to come along to change the way you did something. But now, almost on a weekly basis, especially for lawyers, there might be a new tool that, unless you try it and find out, it might be an e-discovery tool that could save you hundreds of hours every year. But it might seem like a big leap to do that, but it's coming really quickly, I think, especially at lawyers. So it's a brave new world.
Well, for lawyers, first you have to think that the profession hasn't really done anything different for about 150 years.
Wow.
So if you've, as a profession, been doing things essentially the same way for 150 years, when somebody comes along and says we'd like them to different, you're fighting a lot of built-in muscle memory. So that's one challenge. The second thing, one you just talked about, is many years ago, a sociologist did a study and came out with a book on diffusion of ideas through places. Why is it that someone will come up with a good idea and then it seems to take a very long time for that idea to make its way through, even though objectively you would say this is a better way of doing it, etc. And there's something called the diffusion curve, which looks like this curve sort of going up like a big S. And it takes a while. iPhones, computers, TVs, radios, we can look at the time it took for people to adopt that and get to the point where a majority of people were using radio, or were using TV, or were using the smartphone. In the legal industry, in many ways, we're about 10, 12, maybe 15 years into starting to make all sorts of changes, technology, project management, the way we do things. And so we're very early in that diffusion curve, and we're fighting 150 years of muscle memory saying, do it the other way. So, you got to give us a little bit of a break and say, okay, it's going to take a little bit of time here for this to actually diffuse through, even if it objectively is a much better way to do it.
Yeah, naturally, it's not by choice. There's certain impediments, I guess, that are realistic that a lot of other industries don't have to battle. So we'll cut you a little bit of slack. But now that I think now that you've framed lean and lean methodology for people listening, and we've got a clear grasp of that. How does it actually apply to the legal industry, and kind of what are the kind of examples that I guess the go-tos that you're kind of trying to evangelize?
Okay, so one way I try and describe this for lawyers is, imagine the following scenario. You wake up in the morning, you're going to go to work, you get dressed, eat breakfast, you go outside, you go to get in your car, and somebody's standing there and says, wait, I'm sorry, you can't use the car, you've got to walk to work. So you walk all the way to work, you get to work, you work on the 30th floor of a high-rise, you go to use the elevator, and somebody says, stop, I'm sorry, you can't use the elevator, you got to walk up the stairs. Okay? You're confronted with, there's technology. If I use this car, I will get from here to there very quickly. If I have to walk, it's going to take me a long time. If I use the elevator, I'll get up there very quickly. If I have to walk, it takes a long time. Lawyers are used to the world where they walk to work and they walk up the stairs. Part of that has very clearly been because the economic model for lawyering has been built on time. The more time I take, the fact that I walk to work, if I can bill for all that, that's better for me than taking the car.
Nice and slow.
Yeah, that's right. I'll stroll, I'll get a coffee.
Bagel.
So that's much better than taking the car. The same with the elevator. What we're going through now is having to understand that clients have said, what has been, but today, we want you to use the car. We want you to use the elevator because you know what? You're just getting from point A to point B.
Yeah, they're already waiting for you on the 30th floor, so they're already there.
Right, so we don't really need you wasting time on things that don't add any value to us. Your walking to work doesn't add value. It's just, we've got to wait for you to get here. What we want you to spend your time on is the things that do add value to us, your brilliant legal theories, your ways of solving our difficult problems, your creative ways of helping us. And for the other stuff, just find the most effective, most efficient, good quality way to get it done. We know it has to be done. Just get it done quickly, get it done efficiently. So in Lean, what we're trying to do in law is exactly that. Look at what we do and say, is there a better way to do it? Now, sometimes the better way just means changing how we do it. It doesn't involve technology. Sometimes it'll involve technology. Another easy way to understand that is, for years, when I started practicing, you frequently would handwrite your memo or handwrite your brief, give it to a secretary, the secretary would type it, you'd go back and forth. You could do as much work on my handwriting as you wanted to, but I was never going to be able to go as fast as I can typing it into the computer, making changes on the fly. So that's called a limit, and at some point we reach a limit. I can't improve the process, so I substitute in technology, which now can do much better than I could do before. Quality, efficiency down the road, I don't have to retype it. So we're using a combination of the two. Figure out what we're doing today, figure out what we don't need to do, waste, figure out what we could do faster or skip as a step, and then when you hit a limit, figure out how to substitute in technology. So e-discovery is an example. I did manual document review for years. Today, the computer can do that faster. It can do it more accurately. At 2 in the morning, it doesn't say, I need to take 4 hours sleep.
Yeah,
it's
right.
not struggling even with coffee. It can do those types of things much better than I can. We reached a limit in how well humans can do things. Can't necessarily do all of the review of the documents, but can take a lot off our shoulders and then just leave us a small pool to review. And that's what we're looking at. How can we combine the two? I call it the augmented lawyer. How can you augment what you do so that you're using the best of what people can do and what computers can give you an advantage to do, or technology?
Yeah, we've got so much, I guess, technology to choose from these days. There's rising AI, like companies like Ross. Chrissy Lightfoot, who was on the podcast, has just launched Lisa. Another platform using AI, which is speeding up things, making things easier for both lawyers and clients. So it's more, I guess, getting lawyers immersed in this and just feeling safe to actually take that leap to actually just try some of these technologies. Not necessarily revolutionizing the way they do things, but just getting immersed in what's out there and knowing their options, I think.
Yeah, a large part of it is knowing the options. A large part of it is getting past the fear of something they don't feel expert in. Lawyers don't like to do things where they don't feel like they're the expert. And so technology frequently is something where lawyers will feel, I'm not the expert using it and I'll look like a fool, and so best just not to use it. That's another factor. Part of it is knowing that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You use it selectively to improve in those areas where it can really help you. And part of it is figuring out how to update their business model so it's not a business model that's dependent on my using slow, inefficient, ineffective methods, but my business model actually thrives by using technology to my advantage plus my skills. And that's, some of that's culture change as well.
Yeah, it sounds like the first place people want to apply, or the first things they associate Lean with, is just technology. But essentially all the things you've mentioned, Lean, the billable hour, the walking slow, they're all business decisions. So I think that, as you said, you can kind of start doing things on a pen and paper until you hit a limit. It sounds like at the core, Lean is about business decisions, and that affects your model, what the clients want, putting them first. And then you work out how to actually implement technology to actually hit those things on the head and actually execute those. I guess for now, like, it sounds like you need a new business model. So how do you actually deliver that business model? Well, you got to be more efficient to actually compete.
And it starts, technology comes in at a certain point. What we really recommend is sit down and look at, how do you do things today? What is your process today? So we have a method for that called process mapping. We have value stream mapping. These are some of the tools I mentioned. But we use those tools and say, how do you do it today? Then we look at it and say, what do you do that your customer, your client, would not be willing to pay you for if they actually knew you were doing it? And so one of my joking lines is, how much does your client want to pay you to stand in front of the photocopier and watch it copy 100 pages? Ask them sometime, and my guess is they're going to tell you nothing. Okay,
But
so
somehow it ends up on the bill there, right?
yeah, but your time, or somehow that's being done during the day, it would be both good for you and your client if you could avoid doing that. So it's a waste of time, and you'd like to figure out, how do I get that out of my day? It's a simple example, but everybody can appreciate it. Once you've done that process, and this is all ongoing, you're going to constantly do it, but once you are into doing that process, that's when you start looking at steps in the process and say, what could make it more efficient? So one thing that we can look at and say is more efficient is if we're talking face-to-face like we are now. I can see you, you can see me, we can read expressions, we know if you're smiling even though you may not be laughing out loud. And for us, those are a lot of visual cues we use in negotiating and in discussing things. So it can make it much more efficient for me to be sitting here working on a document with you, seeing face to face, because I could be sitting here saying something and I can see from your expression that that's like a non-starter.
Yeah.
You may not be saying that with your voice, you may not be talking at all, but I know from that I've got a problem to deal with. Okay? And now I'm reacting, and I'm being more efficient with my time than belaboring it for 10 minutes, after which you say, non-starter, Kim, let's move on.
Even I guess with even with clients, you can with colleagues, you can tell how engaged they are, and who's actually listening. And the fascinating part for me is, like, again, in legal land, when we're talking to law firms and lawyers, naturally the first place they start thinking of is, okay, how does this help me save time? But I guess the kicker is, you look at your client's time and you go, okay, so if they have to travel to your office, and technologies improve, the video technologies improve, people's broadband speeds are faster. Once upon a time, video was a bit taboo, but you look at what it does for your client, more importantly than what it does for yourself, because you're not leaving your office that much, but a client has to take maybe half an hour commute to get to your office, half an hour to sit down, maybe 10 minutes in the waiting room, whatever else, to actually get that maybe 15-minute document review or sign that document. And that's like maybe up to 2 hours out of their day, which is obviously something you can't bill for. They're paying you for your time as a lawyer. So there's both sides, I think, and business-wise, putting a client at the heart of things kind of solves all of those issues that you were talking about. So it's really, again, a client-centric model that you're kind of talking about.
It is, and there's things that we forget that are very important to us as humans. So there's been a big push in the United States to try and figure out how we can incorporate computers into providing legal services for low-income individuals who can't pay a lot. And we have various states that have developed these computer legal aid systems. One of the things they've discovered in implementing these is, for example, in the Hispanic community, lawyers were saying that using these online tools was creating problems and actually didn't work for them because they couldn't see their client. And they were saying that in their culture, part of what they needed to see were the visual expressions, the visual cues, what the person was, if they were using their hands or other things, because that was part of the communication method. It wasn't just hearing the words, it was seeing the body language, the entire package, and that was very important in their culture to the communication. And so these lawyers were saying without that, it didn't really work. They couldn't represent their clients. And if you think about communication globally, for many people in many different cultures, the physical aspects are as important as what you're hearing come out of my mouth. And in a global world, it's not going to work if all you see or all you hear is the words. So we forget how much human eye-to-eye contact, even though it's over, those are all important. So what does that mean for efficiency? I mean, it's great, but what does it mean for efficiency? It means that we can spend a lot of our time wasted because we're not really communicating. And because we're not really communicating, I'm going to write something, I'm going to draft something that doesn't work for you. and you're going to come back and say, Ken, this doesn't work. And the reason we didn't communicate on it is because I heard your voice, but I never really saw the total package, and
Yeah.
so I didn't do that. That's why a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, we'll have to fly to Singapore to do this because we have to be there in person.
That
And then the other
interaction,
person
yeah.
says, yeah, this is a 1 hour negotiation. You want me to fly to Singapore,
Yeah,
negotiate
right.
for an hour, and then fly back?
Well, I guess lawyers are being trained, all their career to actually read body language, and whether it's in the courtroom, whether it's a deposition, or whether it's knowing to put the foot down, in a trial or something. I guess those elements can get lost over phone calls and whatever else.
People are very visually oriented. Most of our brain, or much more of our brain, is devoted to visual processing than it is to speech. When you were out on the Serengeti and a lion was running after you, you didn't stop and have a conversation with the guy next to you about what that meant, what the best plan was. Your brain needed to process pretty quickly, get the heck out of Dodge. And so our brains have a large visual processing component. And if we take that away, we're actually depriving ourselves of a lot of the inputs that are very helpful to what we do. So, that's to the extent that we have it available to us, we should use it. And tools enable us to do that. And, it's a good example. There's a limit. I can't see you in Australia, no matter how much process improvement I do. But I can use a tool and I can solve that problem and I can become more efficient.
Yeah, well, even for e-discovery, you look at platforms like Ravel and all these new visual-based,
Right.
I guess they're taking information and giving it visual data points and going to what's intuitive for humans, and really bringing a new level of data and data association. So that's another area that's kind of really, again, making lawyers more efficient visually.
Yeah, visualization of things. I can tell you two things. I can tell you the number 1 and the number 100, and you have some idea of what those mean. If I show you a graph that shows 1 and 100, you will process that much more quickly. You will get the point much more quickly. And that's what many of these are playing off of. You see, node diagrams that show you the interconnection of cases and how things relate to one another, and your brain can look at that and instantly say, see the big cluster over here, that's an important area of activity. It's very hard to convey that same information as quickly just writing it down.
Yeah.
So,
all right, great. So is there one